We're going to be in 1 Corinthians 15. If you have a Coffee House Bible, that's page 618. 618. 1 Corinthians 15. This is Resurrection Sunday. I'm going to interrupt the Reflect on the Word series that we've been going through for the last 6 weeks. I'm going to save the finale for next week. Let's just talk resurrection today. Talk resurrection. Man, this is good news. It's good news for my family. Kelsey and I have, just like you, we have a lot going on between like my knee and my health and Kelsey's health. We've had these daily prayers of God, would you make us whole? Would you heal our bodies and make us whole? And we just have this growing conviction that actually, even if he were to heal us, we would not be made whole until the resurrection. And praise be to God that Jesus Christ is raised from the dead, and I can know that Kelsey and I will both be made whole. We have challenges with parenting. Different seasons, it's different children. In some seasons, it's multiple children. And so in the last several weeks, we've been pretty desperate in our prayers for some of our situations that we're in with our family. And this is several months ago. Kelsey and I were praying, and the Lord gave us this picture. I'll say he gave it to Kelsey, and Kelsey shared it with me, and I sort of joined her in that. It was this picture of us just kind of walking up, trying to ascend this mountain of God, right? This life's journey is what it represented. And we were just so burdened by what he had given us to carry that it felt like we couldn't keep going. And so in prayer, Jesus made it clear that he was the one who helped us ascend. And that you could put your burdens on him and he was going to help us there. And praise be to God that Jesus Christ is raised from the dead, and he helps me and my wife navigate the burdens of our life. But some of the major burdens that we felt were for our kids, and some of our problem is that we kept taking their burdens and we would try to carry those things. And so he says, no, they actually have to carry their own. They have to make their own journey. And we're all trying to ascend to glory in this time of prayer. And then the Lord gave us this deep reassurance that we and our kids would be in glory. So, praise be to God that Jesus Christ is raised from the dead, and he brings me to glory one day. And he can bring our kids to glory. And there's stuff in my heart that I'm working on. I shared several weeks ago that I'm in counseling, and so I'm seeing these cycles. And my counselor, he was naming one of these. He calls it like a limbic response, right? Like your brain is just, it gets activated. Stuff you learned in childhood, he says it has resonance, and then resonance leads to your learned way of regulation. He says, but the good news is you can move from your learned way of regulation into like a revision. You can do it differently. And it's like, okay, this is good. There's 3 R's. He knows my love language. Resonance, regulation, revision. I said, his name's Colton. Colton, I think you need a 4th R, resurrection. Because the reality is that I'm going to continue struggling with this, but one day, as D.A. Carson once said, he's like, there's nothing that I'm struggling with that a good resurrection won't take care of. It's like, so there's stuff in me that I'm needing transformed. There's stuff in my kids that I'm feeling burdened by. There's like the burdens of life in a walk, and then there's my health, and it's just like all of this just points to this resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm banking a lot on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Aren't you? And I don't know, you've got your own versions. That's just a couple of mine, right? The ones that are okay to share on stage, right? But you've got your own versions of what is it that you're needing resurrection power to do today? Is it something in your heart? Is it something like in your limbic response, this learned pattern of behavior that you wish would change? Is it something with your kids? Is it something with your marriage? Is it something that's actually maybe physical? Maybe it's grief? Maybe it's something mental? All of this, it's just like we're here because we're banking a lot on the resurrection. And so today I know that we come with all of that, and I want you to. But we also do it on like a global scale, where we have wars and rumors of wars, and we have economic crises, and we have gas that's now $4 a gallon, and what does that mean for the future of our world? And it's like we come. Okay, so this is where we are, and we come to the resurrection of Jesus, and we say, could it be true? I was reading about this guy in 1970. His name's Timothy. And he was a part of a campus ministry, very small group of people. In 1970, Richard Nixon is the president. The Vietnam War is active, but Nixon takes a new step, and he sends American troops into Cambodia too. And so what happens is that in campuses all over the country, they start protesting. It's a student strike. We won't go to class. There's more important things to talk about today. And so they would just like go out on the quad or onto the lawn of whatever their campuses were, and they would just have open dialogue. It would be an open mic, and then there was like debate, discussion, open dialogue because of the brokenness of the world. And Timothy was at this with a few of his campus ministry friends, and I want to do this at some point. So maybe me and Kevin over at the Student Center can do this. He and his friends, they made a sign, and here's what the sign read. He said it was a black sign. I think it was white letters. He says, "The resurrection of Jesus Christ is intellectually credible and existentially satisfying." So you think Nixon needs to solve your problems? You think like a war in Vietnam or Cambodia, either starting or stopping. You think the price of gas. You think that you can do something about your psychological patterns that you learned in childhood. It's just like, all right, yes, we have some agency here. Yes, we walk through life in a broken world and we will be held accountable and responsible. Yes, God has gifted us. But at some point, this is actually, I think, what it comes down to. It's like whatever you're protesting in your personal life or in your family or in your marriage or on the streets of Memphis, it ultimately comes back to this. Is the resurrection of Jesus Christ intellectually credible and existentially satisfying? And if the answer is yes, let's go. If the answer is no, let's go home. But you have to have an answer for this question for all of the questions of the brokenness of our world. I think this is the best protest sign I've ever heard of. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is intellectually credible and existentially satisfying. Timothy said he got cursed out by a few people that week, but he actually had tons of amazing conversations that week. A few students that year, they came back on campus the next year, and he says there was 120 people that showed up at our first event. The Lord was doing something through this spread of this news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Today, we're going to be in 1 Corinthians 15. And the sermon is that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is intellectually credible and existentially satisfying. So if you just want to write that down, you got it. You can go home. But I'm going to do it in 3 points instead of just 2. And the first one is really this idea that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is intellectually credible, and that's because the resurrection is historic. This is what Paul, the apostle, writes in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians is actually one of the earliest documents that was written, according to scholars, that was written. Now, Paul isn't one of the first believers. He comes into the story a little later, but he's one of the first to write down that we still have recorded some of the claims. And so 1 Corinthians is probably written within 15 or 20 years of the death of Jesus on the cross, and then the claims of the resurrection. And so what we have is a global spread of the claims of the resurrection of Jesus Christ that are now going over into Corinth. Like they're spreading throughout Asia and into Europe. And this is what the claim is. It's a historical claim. Now, it's important to clarify, this is a historical claim because we live in the United States, and for the last 200 years in the United States, people in the United States, modern people, are very embarrassed. They're very embarrassed about historic Christianity. And so there's this rise of what has been called liberal Christianity. And that's not to be a pejorative or anything, this is just what it is. The rise of, it's like Thomas Jefferson. Have you ever seen the Jefferson Bible? Where he basically, he just eliminates, he cuts out every miracle. His Gospels in the Jefferson Bible, they end at the death of Jesus and he's where he's put in the tomb. You know, there's no miracles. We are modern people. We're so much smarter than people used to be. We know that people stay dead. This is what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery, where it's like, you think everyone else is stupid and that you're so bright? He's like, please. This rise of liberal Christianity tried to strip away the miraculous and things like the resurrection of Jesus. So it was essentially a shift from the event of Easter into the spirit of Easter. And so, you know, the spirit of Easter is like, it's springtime, there's new life. You know, as if the leaves falling is death, and then as the flowers are blooming is life. This is Easter. Easter is like this, it's this reinvention. It's a creative power. It has nothing to do with the event of, it's like Jesus, he died at some point, we don't really know how. And he's alive in the spirit. And he can come visit you. And so there was this Christianity that was formed that was mostly about how you treat people. It's like, we need to be nice, and we need to be tolerant, and we need to be good people. But this isn't the claim that Paul is making. This isn't the claim of the New Testament. This is Richard Niebuhr in 1900s. He's trying to summarize this movement and what it says. It says, there's a God without wrath who brought men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the Christ without a cross. It's like, this is the rise of liberal Christianity. But Tim Keller says, this narrative, however, is not actually an updated version of Christianity. Rather, it's the creation of a different religion altogether. Christianity's unique message that you are saved not by what you have to do, be nice, be kind, be tolerant, but by what God has done, the event of Easter, it's swept away. The crushing weight of self-salvation is put squarely back onto the believer. And so what I'm saying is that the claims of the gospel, this word gospel, we'll see it in this text, they are not mythical. They are not philosophical, right? This isn't Buddha and ideas. They're not psychological. It's not what you talk about with your therapist. They're not spiritual. They are historical. Let's just be straight about what we're talking about. This is what Paul says in perhaps the first document ever written that recounts the resurrection of Jesus. It is a historical claim that's being made, not a claim that you should do something or that you should become something. It's just a record of what happened and then the implications of it. This is how Paul opens up this chapter. He says, now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel. Your version may say the good news. It's the same word. It's an announcement. He says, this is the gospel that I preached to you. So if this is the first document, now he's talking about a prior time when he first traveled to the city. He says, this is what the message was. This is Christianity, which you received and which you have taken your stand by this. Do you see the word again? Gospel, you're saved. So whatever this gospel is he's going to share, this is our salvation. If you hold firmly to the word that I preach to you, otherwise you have believed in vain. Later on in this chapter, he's going to explain what he means by believed in vain. He says, if you get gospel wrong and you forget the historical nature of this is what happens. He says, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. It's not just me up here, you there, all of us. What are we doing here? More than that, we are then found to be false witnesses about God. We're blasphemers, he says. He says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is, you see it, futile. It's a waste. You're still in your sins. There is no salvation if Jesus isn't raised. There's no spirit of Easter if Easter didn't happen. He says, then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ, they're lost. Those funerals you went to for your grandparents or for that tragic death of your high school friend, it was all a farce. It's just for the vibes. That's the only reason we do it. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are to be pitied more than all men. This is the first account of the resurrection that is written down, and it says if it didn't happen, it's all a waste. It's vain. There is no salvation. There is no forgiveness of sins. There is no life after death. Everything rides on this. This is a pretty significant claim. This is N.T. Wright. He says, the Christian message is good news, not good advice. There is a liberal Christianity that says a good advice gospel. And that is a different religion than the announcement of Jesus Christ raised from the dead for your sins according to the Scriptures. Okay, so this isn't about what you have to do. This is what Jesus has already done. The word itself, this is what it means. It means news. And so if there's a royal proclamation that needed to be made about who the king was, or if he had a new son, or if there was a great victory, what is the word they would use? They would use this word, gospel. They would write it up. They would say, we have news. Go proclaim it to all the world. Something has happened. Something has happened that the world is forever changed. And the something that has happened that the world is forever changed is that Jesus of Nazareth, the crucified one, the third day was raised from the dead. Today's the anniversary of that day, of something that happened. It's a historical claim. This is John Updike. He has this poem. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning poem and a poet and author. And he says, make no mistake, if he rose at all, it was as his body. If the cell's dissolution did not reverse, the molecule reknit, the amino acids rekindle, the church will fall. It was not as the flowers, each soft spring recurrent. It was not as his spirit in the mouths and fuddled eyes of the 11 apostles. It was as his flesh, ours. The same hinged thumbs and toes, the same valved heart that pierced, died, withered, paused, and then regathered out of enduring might, new strength to enclose. Let us not mock God with metaphor, with analogy, sidestepping, transcendence, making of the event a parable, a sign painted in the faded credulity of earlier ages. Let us walk through the door. The stone is rolled back, not papier-mâché. Not a stone in a story, but the vast rock of materiality that in the slow grinding of time will eclipse for each of us the wide light of day. He says, let us not seek to make it less monstrous for our own convenience, our own sense of beauty, lest awakened in one unthinkable hour, we are embarrassed by the miracle and crushed by remonstrance. That's pretty strong. This is a poetic. He's just saying, if it happened, it matters. If it didn't happen, what are we doing? Let's stop pretending. Let's get back to what Christianity actually is. Now, years ago, I was talking to the old preacher, save his name, big giant man. And he was telling me, he says, let me tell you the first time I heard the gospel. He says, I was 4 years old, and it was from my 6-year-old cousin. He says, they're out playing in the water down by a pond. And she starts asking, she comes from, you'll probably be able to tell which religious movement she comes from. She says, do you call your preacher reverend? He says, well, yeah. She's like, well, you're not supposed to. And then she asks him, do you take the Lord's Supper every week or every once in a while? He says, well, every once in a while. She says, well, you're not supposed to. You already know, don't you? He says, do you use unleavened bread or regular bread? And he says, well, we just use bread. She says, well, you're not supposed to. And then she says, do you even know how to baptize? She says, go baptize that duck. So they catch a duck. And he takes some water and he sprinkles the water on the duck. She says, that's not how you baptize a duck. And she takes the duck and she dunks it in the water. There are false gospels everywhere. They're about all the things that we should be doing. This is not Christianity. Christianity is Christ, John Stott says. Who Christ is, what he's done, are the rock upon which the Christian religion is built. If he was not who he said he was, and if he didn't do what he said he had come to do, then the foundation is undermined and the whole thing will collapse. Take Christ from Christianity and you remove the heart from it. There's practically nothing left. Christ is the center of Christianity. Everything else is peripheral. You see it. It's historical. It's like, this is the claim, and whether that claim is reasonable, we should talk about it. So first, the resurrection is historical. It's a claim about something that has happened, about which everything else is different. But second, now that we have to have that to be true, could it be true? And how would we know? Second, the resurrection is reasonable. Take a look at where Paul goes in verse 4. Actually, this is from Acts 26. Paul's talking with a ruler. His name's Festus. And he's telling them about the resurrection of Jesus and telling them this message that he's been entrusted with. And he says, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, he's raised from the dead. And Festus just tells him, you're out of your mind, Paul. He says, you've become insane. And Paul says, Festus, sir, he shows him a lot of honor. He says, I'm not insane. What I'm saying is true and reasonable. And he says, and I actually think, Festus, that you see the credibility of this, and here's why. He says, because it was not done in a corner. So in 1 Corinthians 15, this is what Paul says. He says, for what I received, I passed on. Scholars say this phrasing is indicative of like the inheriting of a precious sacred tradition, where you would receive something and then pass it on. That means you can't change it. And so what scholars say is that what he's about to say is early in the tradition. This is not written by Paul. This is passed on by Paul. He says this is first importance. Jimmy Dunn, in his book, Jesus Remembered, he's a pretty critical first century scholar. He's a historian. But he says, we can be entirely confident that this section was formulated within months of Jesus' death. He says, if Paul's receiving it here, we know where Paul probably picked it up. It was when he visited Jerusalem. And if he visited Jerusalem, then we can sort of just work back historically, and we can understand that what is being claimed is within months of the crucifixion of Jesus. And this is first importance. What is it? That Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. So you see the kind of cadence to it, that. These are claims that he has heard, that he is passing on, that actually form an early argument. It's a reasonable case that this is actually worth believing. He says, first of all, do you see the fact of the empty tomb? Christ died, he was crucified, and then he was buried, and then the third day, he left the tomb. Now, it's not that his spirit was alive in heaven, it's that his body walked out of the grave. That's what this word raised means. And so it's this claim of there is an empty tomb. I brought a book up here. Anybody can borrow this at any point. It's a 1,000-page book. It's called On the Resurrection, Evidences, Volume 1. It's 1,000 pages exploring the most critical historians and scholars. And it says, and they still, even critical historians and scholars, they still have to reckon with an empty tomb. This isn't like some myth or psychological or spiritual reality. The tomb's empty. Why is the tomb empty? We have to kind of figure out an explanation for that. But as the case goes, we'll see that there's only a few explanations that fit. There is an empty tomb. The empty tomb was first discovered by Mary Magdalene. It was discovered by a woman who had been possessed by 7 demons. It's like, in a time, in a culture where the testimony of women wasn't permitted in Jewish court, is this the legend that you would write? That the first witness to the empty tomb is not only a woman, but the woman who is well known and documented to have been possessed by 7 demons? You want the crazy lady to be your first witness? Now, that's what they would have thought, but we, of course, can look back and say, actually, that's actually evidence for the empty tomb. They would not make that up. And whose tomb was it? It was Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin Council that murdered Jesus. Why would they invent the tomb of their opponents on the council? Why would they make Joseph look favorable? Not only Joseph, but it says that Joseph went with Nicodemus to put him in that tomb. Nicodemus, another kind of fly-by-night disciple of Jesus who was worried about the public perception because of his status as a leader and a religious teacher. Why would they make these guys look? These are not the stories that you would invent. These are the earliest witnesses to the tomb of Jesus and then to the empty tomb of Jesus. We have so many historical records of people visiting this tomb and then their stories being captured and shared. You can go to the tomb of Jesus today. You can see where his corpse was laid. And then you can see it's still empty. No one has ever been able to account for the empty tomb of Jesus. So there's this fact of the empty tomb, but then what Paul says, he died, buried, raised. He says, and that he appeared. He appeared, alive from the dead, not just like a spiritual presence. No, that's what they were expecting. So when Peter's in prison in the book of Acts, and he's broken out of prison, and he goes and he visits these people who are praying for him, they're terrified. Like they answer the door, and they're like, he says, "It's Peter, I'm here." And they're scared, they're terrified. They say, it's Peter's ghost. Because I don't know if you knew this, but first century people, they knew that people didn't rise from the dead. It's like, if you were to encounter someone who has died, you're encountering their ghost. But these stories are a different thing. That's not what is being claimed here. He appeared to Cephas. Who's Cephas? Now, this is the Aramaic name of Peter, which is a pretty good indicator, again, of its early origins. This is not how Paul talks about Peter. He knows him as Peter. This is his Aramaic name, which means it has an Aramaic origin. And so what is being handed on is so early. He appeared to Cephas. Now, this is what you would expect. They wouldn't say, he appeared to Mary Magdalene, our best witness. That is true. That was the first appearance. But they needed some credibility, so they put in Cephas here. And they say, he appeared to Peter. He actually appeared to Peter multiple times. We have records in multiple first century written documents that this happened. And it says, and then to the 12. So it wasn't just an individual, it was to groups of people. Not just groups of people, but masses of people. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time. At the same time. This is not how hallucinations work, right? This is not how, maybe you think that someone could be manipulated psychologically because of their guilt or something into believing that Jesus was raised from the dead. But the reality is, when Peter saw the empty tomb, he was so angry because he didn't know who had stolen the body. And he didn't want his Lord to be desecrated. And it says, he just didn't understand about the resurrection. That's what the text says. But not only did he appear to large groups of people, many, all at the same time, but it says many of them are still living. And so this becomes, within a generation, this historical eyewitness account with named individuals of people that you could go meet and talk to. They're still living. Go check them out. And it says, though some have fallen asleep, which means they've passed. They don't want to talk about dead because really, if the resurrection is true, they will live. They will wake up. Then he appeared to James. James is the brother of Jesus. James was not one of Jesus' disciples during his lifetime. He's one of those looking at the outside saying, Jesus, really, come on. You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing Mom. What about our family name? You're making us look like fools, Jesus. Everywhere you go, this is what you're doing? And this man, who was a skeptic of his own brother, ends up being the leader in the first century church. He ends up being stoned to death for his faith in his own brother. How could that be? It's because he appeared to him after he saw him crucified. And then it says, and then to all the apostles. And so we saw the fact of the empty tomb. What do we do with this? It's just a historical fact. The second historical fact, again, that even secular, non-religious, skeptical scholars agree on is the fact of the resurrection appearances. There's just so many of these stories. This is from a book called Can We Trust the Gospels? The resurrected Jesus is recorded appearing in Judea and in Galilee, in town and countryside, indoors and outdoors, in the morning and the evening. This feels a little bit like Dr. Seuss at some point. By prior appointment and without prior appointment, close and distant, on a hill and by a lake, to groups of men and groups of women, to individuals and groups of up to 500, sitting, standing, walking, eating, always talking. Many are explicitly closed-up encounters involving conversations. In the New Testament itself, we have 10 different recorded stories of resurrection appearances to different groups of people. It's just, there are attorneys who have like gone back and looked at this, and many of them are saying, look, I've gotten verdicts on way less evidence than this. Like when I look at the types of witnesses that these are not fictive. These are not legends. The evidence is clear. So N.T. Wright, he's got his own beast of a book. It's about 800 pages. It's called The Resurrection of the Son of God. It's a historical look at whether Jesus was raised and kind of the framework of if that made sense then. And it says, the early Christians did not invent the empty tomb and the meetings or the sightings of the risen Jesus. Nobody was expecting this kind of thing. No kind of conversion experience would have invented it. To suggest otherwise is to stop doing history and enter into a fantasy world of our own. Paul says, and last of all, he appeared to me also as to one abnormally born. Paul wasn't in those first 40 days. Paul's experience of Jesus came months, years after, as he was persecuting the church, as he was on his way to Damascus to go murder and kill Christians. He hated Christians. And he says, but I also saw this. I saw him. He met me. And this is what is true not only of Paul, but of just millions, billions of people around the planet. J.I. Packer, he says the corporate experience of the Christian church over 19 centuries chimes in with the belief that Jesus rose. For the risen Lord today truly walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. And communion with him belongs to the basic Christian awareness of reality. In the 60s and 70s, there was this movement that said God is dead. It was on the cover of Time magazine. And at least according to legend, Billy Graham was one time asked, like, Billy Graham, what do you say? Is God dead? It's on the cover of the magazine. He says, of course he's not dead. I talked to him this morning. It's like, it's not just Paul. It's me. It's you. There's 1,900 years of people who continue to hear and to meet Jesus. There are these witnesses, eyewitnesses to those first 40 days, but from the right hand of the Father, he's still meeting us. And so no sense can be made of any of this evidence save by supposing that Jesus really rose. The actual historical effect. Right? So why would Peter, who saw his Lord crucified, who denied him the day before, why would he go to his death and be crucified for a belief he knew to be fiction? Why would his brother be stoned to death? Why would you see all of these people turn their life? Why would you see Jews by the thousands stop worshiping on Saturday and immediately start worshiping on Sunday? Why would you see monotheists, again, Jews, the Lord is one. This is the most important commandment. The Lord is one. There's only one, monotheism. Why would you see them bowing down and worshiping Jesus the next week? How do you understand the transformation of those early disciples and then the rise of Christianity within a Jewish context in the city where Jesus was crucified? This is where it started. It started in the city where he was crucified. Everybody saw him crucified, and then 7 weeks later, 3,000 people are baptized in his name for the forgiveness of sin and to receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And it's just like, to look back on those people and say, you are so stupid. Don't you know people don't rise from the dead? They're like, yes, we know that. But then we met him. And so I'm giving everything for him. If he's raised from the dead, everything's different. This is the gospel message that is being announced. It's the fact of the empty tomb. It's the fact of the resurrection appearances. And it's the fact of the rise of Christianity within a Roman and a Jewish world that was totally antithetical to it. And so historians they're baffled by this. What do we do with these three facts that everybody knows are true? There's only so many explanations, but there's only one that accounts for all three, and that is that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. He left an empty tomb behind him. He met his disciples and transformed their lives, and they gave everything for him, and he can still do the same for us. So it's a historic claim about events that happen, not a spirit of Easter. And then it's actually a reasonable claim. This is N.T. Wright. He says no other explanations have been offered. In 2,000 years of sneering skepticism, there's no other explanations that can satisfactorily account for how the tomb came to be empty, how the disciples came to see Jesus, and how their lives and worldviews were transformed. To Packer again, to believe in Jesus Christ as Son of God and living Savior, and to echo the words of ex-doubter Thomas, who said, "My Lord and my God," is certainly more than an exercise of reason, but in the face of the evidence, it is the only reasonable thing a person can do. It's historic, it's reasonable. Last one, it's personal. It is personal. So he says, this is what I received, and this is what I passed on. This is what you believed. This is our salvation. But then he adds on to this early account. He says, but I also need to say something about me. Let's start with Paul. I want to tell you a few stories of the personal nature. He says, for I am the least of the apostles. Other places he'll call himself, I'm the chief of sinners. It's like, I don't even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. This is where Paul comes from. He's an enemy. He is a legalist at heart. He has a hard heart, and he is striving for a self-salvation, and he thinks he's doing pretty well. And then Jesus meets him on the road to Damascus and calls him by name. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I love the first name basis that Jesus is on with this man. Paul says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. Do you see? He says, I met Jesus. And Jesus gave me, a legalist, he called me by name and then he gave me grace. And I discovered that I was a murderer and I was the chief of sinners, that I was trying to be zealous for God and I was zealous against the King, his Son, God in the flesh. That was me. Why are you persecuting me? I did all of that. And then by his grace, I was made right. He becomes the apostle of justification by faith. It's actually not on the basis of my works. This is Jesus. He gives us grace, 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 grace. This is Paul the apostle. Paul, like the rest of us, was just as spiritually blind to the nature of salvation. He thought that he could save himself, that he could make God bless him because of his zeal and righteousness. And he thought that Jesus, that uneducated, homeless, unemployed carpenter who died a cursed criminal's death, he thought that Jesus could not possibly have been a savior. But then he met him. Only when Paul who thought he was the best, finally came to see that he was the least, did he become someone great. You see, you have to realize that I'm in desperate need. I am broken and at a loss. How about the story of Mary Magdalene? You remember Mary? That lady with 7 demons? That's how she's introduced in the Bible. It's just like, Luke, did you have to include that part? It's like, I want to be Mary the Beautiful, you know? It's like, no, Mary who had 7 demons. But can you just imagine what that would be like? To be a woman with that much trauma in your life? Because if you came from that much trauma and oppression, and then you met Jesus and he took care of you, and then you saw the one man in your life who ever took care of you, you saw him crucified, what would you feel? This is Mary. Like, there are these stories of denials and people fleeing from Jesus. Peter denies him. His friend Judas betrays him. And it says, all ran away from him in Gethsemane. There's, in the Gospel of Mark, there's this young man, it says he has a linen cloak on. And it says that somebody grabbed his cloak and he just ran away naked. And presumably this is Mark, the author. He's just not naming himself. But do you know who didn't run away? Mary. Mary's there at the cross. Mary's there watching where they put him in a grave. Mary's there on Sunday morning at sunrise. And she says, she comes to the tomb. She's the first one there. She can't believe it. Why would they take him? So she runs and she tells somebody who could do something. She tells Peter. She tells John. They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they laid him. Can you feel her confusion? Like the hopelessness of, we thought that he was the Lord, but we don't even know where he is. And so Peter and John, they take off on a foot race back to the tomb. Mary catches up. Peter and John, they go and they investigate. And they look in and they find, it's weird. Here are the burial clothes right here. Here's all the anointing spices. Here's the head covering. It's folded up separately. It's placed here. And then Peter and John, it says they went back to their homes. But Mary doesn't go back. Who's she supposed to go to? It says, but Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. She looks in, and there's these two men, but they're dazzling white, just whiter than you can see. And they say, woman, why are you weeping? And she says, they've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him. She has to repeat herself now. She's feeling desperate. And then there's another voice behind her. And he says, woman, why are you weeping? Can you imagine just being asked this question again and again? She says, sir, she thinks he's the gardener. If you've carried him away, can you just tell me where you've laid him and I will take him away? And then she hears this, Mary. And then she turns and she says to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. And so why would Mary be the first? This woman that no one's going to believe, and as they're trying to pass on the tradition, they have to put Peter's name in because somebody will actually believe it then. But Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, they tell about this woman, Mary, who's there first. She actually becomes the one who tells the disciples about the resurrection of Jesus. He says, go, I want you to announce it to them. Why would you choose her? He says, because I like Mary. Because I care what she says. I love this woman. She's my friend. The resurrection is personal. It's Simon Peter. Mary runs to him on Sunday, but on Thursday, he's the one running away. Remember the story? He says, even though they all fall away, I will not. And Jesus says, no, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times. He says, emphatically, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. But Peter, at the crow of the rooster, he says, Peter remembered. And he broke down and wept. So Paul, he has this legalistic hard-heartedness. And Mary has this broken-heartedness and deep trauma. And then there's Peter, who just has immense shame. He just can't believe what he's done. This is not who he wanted to be. It's not how he saw himself. It's not what he promised he would be. But then Mary runs to him, and she says this, he's risen. He's not here. And so he runs to the tomb. It's empty. He doesn't know what to do with this. And he goes, this is the message to Mary. Go tell his disciples. Right? The angels, tell Jesus' disciples. He's not here. He's risen. Tell him. Announce it, Mary. And she does. But do you see it says, and Peter? Certainly Peter's one of the disciples. But this guy needs a step towards him because of the hole that he's putting himself in. He's just sinking. He wants to be invisible. He hates himself. He goes back to fishing. But on a first-name basis, the resurrected Jesus steps toward Peter and says, I want that guy too. Everybody was at the table when he said it. Can you imagine the next table? And Jesus says, what do you think the resurrection is? It's for people like Paul. It's for people like Mary. It's for people like Peter. It's for people like Thomas. Thomas is a skeptic. He's cynical. He doesn't believe it. He doubts. He says, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails and place my finger into the mark of the nails and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. He says, you guys are stupid. What are you talking about, raised from the dead? Like the level of proof that's required. And Jesus steps forward and he says, put your finger here, see my hands, put out your hand, place it at my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. And then Thomas says, my Lord and my God. So, the essence of Christianity, Tim Keller says, is personal pronouns. If you were here this morning saying Jesus, the Son of God, was born, he died, he was raised, he ascended, and he's coming again, that doesn't make you a Christian. But if you say the Son of God was born for me, he died for me, he was raised for me, he was ascended to the right hand of the Father for me, and he's going to come again for me, that's the essence of Christianity. We will never be able to accept it until we see our need for God's grace. So this is Paul, the legalist who needs God's grace. This is Mary, the traumatized, demon-possessed who needs God's grace. This is Peter wallowing in the shame. This is Thomas, the skeptic, the doubter. They need God's grace. And when they realize they need God's grace, Jesus is there saying, come with me, I'm alive. Jesus meets you where you are. That's the only place he can find you, right where you are. Thank God for that. Jesus takes different approaches with different hearts and temperaments. There's no template. There's no 5 steps to becoming a Christian that are required of everyone. Some have said that Mary was a feeler, John a thinker, Thomas a pragmatist. He knocked Paul flat with a rebuke, but he gently spoke Mary's name. What Jesus is telling us in all this is this. I know you individually, and your path is going to be your own. Which means it can't be your mother who makes this decision for you. It can't be your father who makes this decision for you. You can't decide it for your children or your spouse or your significant other. This is you, and Jesus wants to meet you. So, oh man, how cool is it to just think about the resurrection on the anniversary of the resurrection of Jesus. But I just want to frame it up a little bit and then give us a response time in worship. Worship team, would y'all mind to come to the stage? I want to wrap up, and then I want us to be able to worship together. So you probably guessed who Timothy is under the sign in 1970 at his university. The last Welcome Home group, I've heard rumors that they said Tim Keller he should be an associate pastor at Oikos Church with how much work he does here. It's true. In 1970, Tim Keller was sitting under the sign that said the resurrection of Jesus Christ is intellectually credible and existentially satisfying. And he was around these students who were seeing a world in chaos, and they needed some kind of transformation in their own life. And he says, but I know the one who is. But there's going to be 2 obstacles. There's the rational mind, and he says, there's a good case to be made that Jesus Christ is raised from the dead. But he also says, but your heart needs to know this too. I'm just waiting for the next one. All right. I've got one story. And so, all the stuff we started with about like what I'm doing in my heart and in my patterns that I learned in childhood, and what I'm doing with my kids, and what I'm trying to figure out with Kelsey and with our bodies. It's just like, man, I've got a lot riding on this. So this is a dumb story to end on, but bear with me. All right, Adrian, where are you at? All right, we just stand up for like 2 seconds. Adrian and I, we were at Walmart a few days ago. I'm buying. Oh no, I'm buying a gift for one of my daughters for her birthday. I can't tell what it is. We have to protect the secret. Yeah. And so, we load the basket. We go through the checkout line. And the cashier's just not paying attention to me at all. And so we take everything out of the cart, we put it on, and we have this massive gift on top of the cart. And she's just kind of in her own world. We check out, I pay, and we go to the exit. There's somebody there who says, can I see your receipt? So I give her my receipt. She gives it back. And then I look at Adrian and I said, I don't know if we actually rang up this big gift. And here we are, like, you know how they have those gates where there's like an alarm that goes off? And so I'm walking towards that gate. And I'm like, I said, we're about to find out. And right next to that gate is a guy who is, as the kids say, built different. He's at least 6'6", and he is jacked. He's got a big police vest on. He's got a big gun on his side. And he's just standing there, right where I'm walking. And I just pass through, and I just keep walking, and we get out to the parking lot, and I said, Adrian, we made it. And then I pulled out my receipt, and the total was half of what this one item would have cost. I was like, oh no. And then for a minute, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take this thing. That cashier deserves it. They checked my receipt. This is their fault. I should get this free gift. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just said, Adrian, I'm going to take these groceries to the truck. Will you go back inside? Meet me at the cashier. I'm going to pay. And so as he goes in, I learned that they're just haggling him. They're like, where's he at? Where's he at? And I come in, and I hear them doing this. And then the woman who checked my receipt, she's created a story. She says, yeah, I was hollering after them. They were just running through. They just wouldn't stop. And I was like, what? And so we went to the cashier. I paid for it, and I put that receipt in my pocket. And then I walked to the exit, and I said, here it is. And they checked it. And then I go to the truck. I go get it, and Adrian's going to help me load it at the front. When I come back, I pull up next to him, and there he is, built different. Just talking with Adrian. And I was like, oh no, what is happening? What is this conversation? And then I thought, but does it really matter? I've got the receipt now. And so I'm just convinced that, my heart, who's trying to do the right thing and go through life, and is just so often uncertain, insecure, because of the stuff in my own heart, because of the stuff in my own body and in my family and our world. It's like insecurity is all around me. And then I've got this receipt that I just carry everywhere with me that says, but Jesus Christ is raised from the dead. I've got a receipt for that. I've got a receipt that says he knows me by name. I've got a receipt that says he loved me enough to go to the cross. This isn't just some belief. I've got the receipts. This is forgiveness of sins. It's like, how could you ever know? And it's like, here's the receipt. He's raised from the dead. It's like, I've done so many funerals. When you're the preacher in the family, you get to do all your grandparents' funerals. And I can stand in front of my family and I can say, we will see them again in glory. And the reason is because I have the receipts. There is a resurrection not only of all of us, but of the world itself. We've got the receipts for that. He's the first fruits. This is where Paul goes on. He's like, we will all be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye. We're going to put on immortality. Death, it will sting, but then we will sing. And it says, like, there's nothing you can do about it. We've got the receipts. You were in Adam, but there's a new Adam. This is all just for me, right? This is what he did for me. But what did he do for him, for Jesus? Jesus says, he says, I'm the Son of God, and so they crucify him. He says, I'm the Son of Man who's going to descend, and I'm going to judge the world. And so they say, he's blaspheming. They say, he made himself equal with God. He says, I'm giving a new law. He spoke as one with authority. He went around healing sickness in bodies. And it's like everything he ever did, he says, now I've got the receipt. And so his name is on good credit. It's above every name. He says, I'm the king. Pilate, you wouldn't be anywhere if I didn't put you there. And I've got a receipt to prove it. If you're worried about a politician or a war, I understand. He says, I'm going to take care of that. The Son has become the King. If you're worried about your sin, about your body and your health, if you're worried about grief and death, if you're worried about trauma, you're legalistic, hard-hearted, Jesus is saying, like, let me meet you and take you on a story. I've got a receipt, and this is the guarantee of something really special.